The moment the car door slammed shut behind me, the icy wind cut through my coat like a knife, and the blinding swirl of snowflakes made the road disappear into white nothingness. My name is Natalie Cross. I am 33 years old, and that night I learned what it meant to be discarded like trash by the man who vowed to protect me. My husband, Lucas, was 38, a bank director with charm polished enough to dazzle boardrooms and poison sharp enough to corrode a marriage. We had just left his company's winter gala, a glittering event filled with champagne and crystal chandeliers, where Lucas had laughed at me in front of his colleagues, calling me his wife an expensive accessory. The humiliation still burned hotter than the frost biting my cheeks, and as the car crawled along the winding Colorado mountain road, I asked quietly, "When did I stop being your partner, Lucas?" He glanced at me, his eyes hard in the dim dashboard glow, and sneered. "You never were. You're a burden." Tonight proved it. Then, with a suddenness that stole the air from my lungs, he swerved the car to the shoulder brake and flung open the passenger door. "Get out. Maybe this storm will teach you your place." My body froze. My heart thudded against my ribs. "You can't be serious," I whispered, but his hand clamped on my arm and shoved. My heels sank into snow up to the ankles, cold seeping through stockings within seconds. Lucas tossed my purse out after me, then slammed the door so hard the window rattled. For a fraction of a second, the red taillights glowed like cruel eyes in the darkness. Then they shrank blurred and vanished as the blizzard swallowed him whole. The silence was suffocating. The only sound was the howl of wind whipping across the frozen asphalt. My breath came in ragged gasps, white clouds dissolving into the night. I bent, fumbled for my purse, and yanked out my phone, fingers trembling too badly to hit the screen at first. The battery bar glared red. I pressed Ben's name. My brother, the only person who had never looked at me like I was a mistake. It rang once, just once. Then the screen went black, the phone dead in my hand. A scream ripped from my throat, half fury, half despair, but it was lost to the storm. The snow burned against my skin, the kind of cold that felt like fire. I started walking, though I had no idea where the road curved, only that if I stopped moving, the storm would finish what Lucas began. My shoes slipped, my body shuddered violently, and hot tears froze on my lashes. My mind flashed back to the ballroom earlier that night, Lucas raising his glass, calling me a decorative expense, laughter echoing while I stood with a brittle smile. I had swallowed the shame then, but now in the merciless night it poured out of me as rage. Minutes bled into eternity. My legs ached, my lips cracked, and when I stumbled, I nearly did not rise again. I thought of my brother Ben, 3 years older, a steady presence since childhood, and the guilt of not calling him sooner cut deeper than the cold. I wished I could hear his voice one last time telling me I mattered. I wrapped my arms around myself and whispered into the dark, "Don't let me disappear out here." Then, through the curtain of white, a new light cut across the road, headlights bright and steady approaching from the opposite direction. For a second, I feared Lucas had returned to finish his cruelty, but the vehicle slowed, a familiar old Chevy pickup, its beams sweeping over the snow until they landed on me. The brakes squealed and the truck slid slightly before stopping. The driver's door flew open. Nat Ben's voice, hoarse and urgent, punched through the night. He sprinted toward me, coat unbuttoned, hair dusted with flakes. He caught me before my knees buckled and pulled me against him, wrapping his jacket around my shaking body. His chest was warm, solid, alive. I saw his car. Alone. "Then I got a missed call from you," he said breathlessly, fury flashing in his eyes. I knew something was wrong. I had to come back. I tried to speak, but my teeth chattered too hard. Tears stung not from the wind, but from the relief. Ben tucked the dead phone into his pocket, lifted me as though I weighed nothing, and carried me toward the truck. As he opened the door, he whispered fiercely, "He thinks he gets the last word. But not tonight. Not ever again." The storm still raged outside, but for the first time in years, I felt the warmth of safety, and the first fragile spark of defiance lit in my chest. Tonight was not just survival. Tonight was the beginning of the end for Lucas Cross. To understand how I ended up standing half frozen in a Colorado snowstorm, you need to know how it all began. On paper, Lucas and I were the perfect couple. We met at a corporate seminar when I was 25, a junior accountant with ambitions sharp enough to cut glass, and he was a polished 30-year-old banking executive on the fast track to director. He swept me off my feet with his confidence, his ability to order the perfect wine without glancing at the menu, the way everyone seemed to lean in when he spoke. By 28, I was married to him, and by 30, I had given up the career I was building to support his rise. It felt like the right decision. Then he told me with that charming grin that he could not do it without me, that my support would mean more than any paycheck. I believed him. At family gatherings, my parents glowed whenever Lucas walked in. He carried himself like a trophy son, shaking hands, firmly retelling his latest deal. My father once joked at Thanksgiving that he wished Ben, my older brother, could take notes from Lucas on how to be more successful. I saw the way Ben's jaw tightened, but he never said a word. He simply poured me another glass of wine and gave me that quiet look that meant, "Are you sure about him?" My mother adored Lucas too, though she often praised my younger sister Madison for her beauty and charm. In the same breath, she reminded me to stay grateful. Grateful for the husband, for the house, for the image. Madison, 5 years younger, became Lucas's little shadow at family events. He bought her small gifts, advised her on business ideas, and she giggled like he was some benevolent mentor. I told myself it was innocent. She was my sister. He was my husband. Why would I doubt them? The first cracks were so subtle I almost missed them. A snide remark about how I loaded the dishwasher. A laugh at a dinner party when he said Natalie's a better decorator than a financier. Everyone chuckled politely, and I laughed too, though my chest tightened. Then came the control over finances. Lucas insisted he manage all our accounts because, as he put it, "You're too soft, Nat. You'd give away the store." I agreed. At first it seemed easier. I told myself marriage was about compromise. But over time, my access to money shrank until I was left asking him for household allowances like a teenager asking her father for gas money. When I voiced unease, Lucas leaned close, eyes glinting, and said softly, "You remember wrong. You're emotional. Don't embarrass yourself." That was his weapon, gaslighting so smooth it made me doubt my own memory. The outside world saw us as a success story, and my parents were proud. They beamed when Lucas upgraded his car, when he spoke of future investments, when he announced bonuses. No one noticed the way my smile had grown brittle, or the way I avoided mirrors because I could not recognize the woman staring back. At night, lying beside him in our king-sized bed, I sometimes reached out a hand only to feel the cold wall of his shoulder turned away from me. Still, I clung to the idea of us, to the story we had told the world. I convinced myself that I was just tired, that every marriage had rough patches, that Lucas's sharp words were just stress. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something was rotting under the glossy surface. A marriage that looked perfect on paper was becoming a prison built from silence and denial. And like every prison, the day would come when the bars snapped. The collapse began with numbers, the very language I once trusted. I still kept my own small notebook, an old accountant's habit I never let go of, where I tracked every grocery receipt and utility bill. One winter morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold, I noticed a charge that did not add up, $20,000 missing from our joint savings. At first, I thought I had miscalculated. Lucas often teased me for being meticulous, but my math had never lied before. When he came home that evening, smelling faintly of cologne that was not mine, I asked gently, "Lucas, did you move money out of the account?" He did not even pause to take off his tie. "I'm investing," he said, brushing past me. "You wouldn't understand." The words stung because they were familiar. He had said them before in smaller ways when I asked about bonuses or questioned why Madison suddenly had designer bags she could not afford. Each time I swallowed my doubt, telling myself not to nag. That night, after he fell asleep, I slipped quietly out of bed and into his office. The blue glow of the computer lit the dark room, and my hands trembled as I opened files I had promised myself never to touch. Transfers, offshore accounts, signatures that looked disturbingly like mine on authorizations I had never signed. My heart pounded as though the truth itself was a burglar in the room. I copied everything I could onto a small USB. my breath shallow, terrified he might wake and catch me. The next morning, he kissed my cheek as if nothing had happened. The casual intimacy made me feel sick, like I was complicit in my own erasure. I forced a smile and told him his tie was crooked just to avoid suspicion. From then on, the cracks widened faster. He would come home late, muttering about meetings, yet his shirt carried faint traces of perfume I did not own. Madison visited often, always cheerful, always defending him when I asked questions. "Nat, you worry too much. Lucas is brilliant. You should be grateful." The word grated the same one my parents had used, the one that made me feel like an intruder in my own marriage. The gaslighting grew sharper. When I mentioned the missing money again, Lucas leaned close, his voice low, dangerous. "Do you hear yourself?" "You sound hysterical. I take care of everything. Without me, you'd drown." He smirked as though he had handed me a truth I should thank him for. At night, when I tried to rest my mind, replayed every conversation, every laugh of his colleagues at the gala, every approving nod of my parents. I began to feel like I was losing grip on reality. Yet in the quiet hours when the house was still, I opened my notebook, reviewed the files I had copied, and reminded myself the numbers do not lie. There was one phrase I repeated in my head whenever doubt clawed at me: evidence never blinks. Lucas could twist my words, mock my feelings, but the transactions, the signatures, the dates, they stood immutable, waiting for the right moment to speak. And though I did not yet know it, that moment was coming fast, wrapped in betrayal, deeper than I imagined betrayal, not just from Lucas, but from the very blood of my family. The storm outside our walls was gathering, and soon it would break them wide open. The night it all came crashing down did not begin with a fight, it began with a smile. Madison, my younger sister, arrived at our house with a bottle of champagne, her laughter echoing through the foyer as though she owned the place. Lucas welcomed her with a hug too long, his hand resting at the small of her back, in a way that made bile rise in my throat. I told myself I was imagining it. Sisters do not betray sisters, and husbands do not cross those boundaries. At least, that is what I wanted to believe. But the universe is cruel when it decides to tear away the blindfold. Later that evening, I went upstairs to grab my sweater. Their voices floated down the hallway, muffled but distinct. Lucas's low, velvety tone, Madison's breathless giggle. I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the knob, heart hammering against my ribs. Curiosity became dread, and dread became certainty. I pushed the door open a fraction, just enough to see. Madison sat on the edge of Lucas's desk, his fingers brushing her wrist, his mouth close to her ear. The air between them was electric in a way that had nothing to do with mentorship or family bonds. My chest constricted, heat and ice colliding under my skin. I wanted to scream, to storm in, to rip her away from him, but the weight of betrayal held me frozen. My sister, my husband. I must have made a sound because Madison's eyes flicked up and widened. She jumped to her feet, smoothing her dress, stammering Nat, "This isn't Lucas," cut her off with a smile, as if caught in nothing more than a harmless game. "Natalie, don't make this dramatic. We were talking business. You always assume the worst." His voice was calm, confident, practiced, while my world was collapsing in jagged pieces around me. I stumbled back the hallway, tilting my breath shallow. Madison reached for me, whispering, "Please don't tell Mom and Dad. They wouldn't understand." The audacity of it, worrying about what our parents would think while she sat in my husband's office with his hand on her, shattered what little restraint I had left. "Get out!" I rasped, my voice low, shaking. "Both of you." Madison looked at Lucas, then at me, her lips curling into a smirk that chilled me more than the blizzard ever could. "You'll ruin everything, Nat. You always do." She swept past me, perfume lingering, leaving the echo of her betrayal carved into the walls of my home. When the front door slammed, Lucas stepped closer, his expression hardening into something sharper, crueler. "You think anyone will believe you?" he asked quietly. "Your sister will deny it. Your parents already think you're unstable. Without proof, you're just a jealous wife grasping at shadows." The truth of his words cut deeper than any blade. My parents had always compared me to Madison, always praised her beauty, her charm, while reminding me to be grateful. Would they side with me now, or would they close ranks around the golden child and her brilliant brother-in-law? That night, as I sat alone in the dark, the USB drive hidden in my desk drawer burned in my thoughts. The numbers, the transfers, the forged signatures, they were real, undeniable. And now I had seen enough with my own eyes to know that Lucas was not just cruel. He was reckless, and Madison had chosen to tether herself to his sinking ship. I pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching snowflakes spiral against the glass. The storm inside me was louder than the one outside. He thought I was weak, that my silence meant defeat. But silence is not the same as surrender. Evidence never blinks, and soon it would speak louder than both of them combined. The betrayal had been unveiled, and there was no going back. Lucas's cruelty was never content to remain private. If betrayal behind closed doors had cracked the foundation of my marriage, public humiliation was his sledgehammer shattering whatever dignity I had left. It happened at the Crossbank annual Winter Gala, an event that seemed designed to spotlight Lucas's charisma and bury me in the shadows. The ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers and golden candelabras, the kind of setting where every whisper echoed, every glance carried weight. I wore a navy silk gown one Lucas had chosen not because it flattered me, but because it matched his tie. "We need to look coordinated," he had said, like we were accessories, not individuals. When we entered, applause rippled across the room. Colleagues, clients, family, friends, they all raised glasses in admiration of Lucas. I stood beside him, smiling mechanically, the good wife who knew her place. My parents were there too, glowing with pride, my mother clasping Lucas's arm as though he were her own son. Ben stood near the back, watching quietly, his eyes narrowing at every slight remark tossed in my direction. Madison, draped in sequins, laughed at Lucas's jokes louder than anyone else, her champagne flute never empty. The speeches began, and when Lucas took the microphone, the room hushed. He thanked his team, the board, his wonderful family. Then his gaze slid to me, and the corners of his mouth curved into that smile I had once mistaken for love. "And of course," he said, voice smooth as velvet, my wife Natalie, who's been such a decorative presence. Laughter rippled through the audience like polite, but it cut through me like broken glass. Decorative, as though my worth began and ended with how I looked standing beside him. Heat climbed my neck, my palms damp. I forced a smile, staring at the floor, but Lucas wasn't finished. "Natalie has always been better at spending money than making it," he quipped, raising his glass. "But hey, every kingdom needs a queen, right?" More laughter. Madison clinked her glass against his, her eyes sparkling with something sharper than amusement. In that moment, time seemed to fracture. I could hear the clatter of forks against plates, the murmur of approval, the hollow applause. I could feel my heart beating too fast, too loud, as though my body itself was rebelling against the charade. My father chuckled. My mother nodded indulgently, as if it were all harmless fun. Only Ben's jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. He met my eyes across the room, and in his steady gaze I saw what I had been too afraid to admit. I was disappearing piece by piece under Lucas's hand, and no one but Ben cared enough to notice. I excused myself before the tears could fall, slipping out into the cold night air, the muffled music fading behind me. Snowflakes dusted my shoulders, melting against my heated skin. I leaned against the stone wall, trying to catch my breath, but humiliation clung tighter than the cold. Inside, they toasted to Lucas, to success, to a marriage that was nothing but a performance. Out here, I stood alone, stripped of dignity, yet more awake than I had been in years. Lucas eventually found me, his breath rich with champagne. "You're embarrassing yourself," he hissed, gripping my arm. "Smile. Go back inside. No one wants to hear your whining." His fingers dug into my skin, leaving bruises that would bloom by morning. I yanked my arm free, meeting his eyes with a defiance I did not yet know I possessed. "One day," I whispered, "they'll see you for what you are." He smirked, patting my cheek as though I were a child. "No, Natalie. One day they'll see you for what you aren't." The gala continued, laughter and music spilling into the night, but something in me shifted. The humiliation was a wound raw and searing, but it was also a spark. Lucas believed he had broken me in front of the world. What he didn't know was that the world had just given me my stage. Evidence never blinks, and when the time came, I would make sure everyone was watching. After the gala, I stopped pretending. I smiled less, spoke less, but observed more. Every word Lucas uttered became a clue, every receipt left on the counter a piece of evidence, every late-night phone call a crack in his armor. He thought humiliation would keep me small. Instead, it sharpened me. I began keeping 2 notebooks, one with my neat accountant's handwriting, documenting the household bills, and another filled with coded note states, amounts, times. Lucas left the house, names he dropped casually. On nights when sleep refused to come, I replayed his remarks, marking them like puzzle pieces waiting for the picture to emerge. The USB drive I had hidden months earlier became my anchor. I upgraded it to a cloud account under a name. Lucas would never guess my childhood dog, Daisy. To anyone else, the files looked like old photographs. To me, they were proof bank transfers, offshore wires, expense reports that smelled of forgery. I learned quickly that Lucas had been funneling money through shell companies padding accounts that he later bled dry. The signatures authorizing some of the withdrawals mine. Except I had never signed them. My first instinct was to confide in my parents, but then I remembered their laughter at the gala, the way my mother clasped Lucas's arm with pride, my father's approving chuckle at his cruel jokes. No, they wouldn't believe me. To them, Lucas was success personified, and I was the wife who had gotten lucky. Instead, I called the only person who had ever seen me without judgment, my brother Ben. A practicing attorney with a quiet presence, Ben had always been the observer in the family, the one who noticed what others overlooked. When he arrived at my house one snowy afternoon, I handed him the USB with trembling hands. He sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through file after file, his brow furrowing deeper with each click. Finally, he looked up, his eyes dark with certainty. "Natalie, this isn't just financial misconduct. These are federal crimes, wire fraud, forgery, maybe even embezzlement." His voice carried the kind of weight that made the air feel heavier. Fear clawed at me. If I bring this forward, Lucas will destroy me. He'll turn my parents against me. Madison. My throat tightened at her name. She's already on his side. Ben reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. Evidence never blinks. Remember that. They can ignore you. They can call you dramatic, but they can't erase numbers. You have truth on your side. The question is, are you ready to use it? I wanted to say yes, but the word stuck. Readiness is a luxury when you're trapped in survival. I was not ready, but I knew I could not stay silent forever. Ben didn't push. Instead, he connected me with a colleague, Angela Pierce, a seasoned family and financial lawyer whose reputation was as sharp as her suits. When I first sat in her office, my nerves rattled like loose change. She listened in silence, her pen tapping against a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back, eyes narrowed. "You have enough to bury him," she said matter-of-factly. "But you'll need corroboration. A forensic accountant, someone who can confirm these transfers and signatures. I know the perfect person, Maria Esposito. She's discreet and thorough. With her, we can build a case so tight, even Lucas's charm can't wiggle out." For the first time in months, hope flickered. It was faint, fragile, but real. Lucas thought he was untouchable, shielded by my family's blindness and his own arrogance. What he didn't realize was that the very arrogance he flaunted would be the rope that tightened around his neck. That night, as I lay awake listening to the hum of the heater and the steady fall of snow outside, I repeated Ben's words to myself like a prayer: evidence never blinks. And soon, neither would I. Maria Esposito was not what I expected. When Angela first mentioned a forensic accountant, I imagined a gray-haired academic buried in spreadsheets. Instead, Maria walked into Angela's office with brisk energy, a dark bob framing her sharp face and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a leather briefcase in the quiet confidence of someone who had made liars squirm on the witness stand. She greeted me with a firm handshake. "I don't waste time," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Show me what you've got." Angela passed her the files from the USB, and Maria's fingers danced over the keyboard with a precision that made me envious. Within minutes, she was muttering under her breath, tracing transfers across jurisdictions, flagging amounts that screamed laundering in her words. Finally, she looked up, lips curled in something close to a smile. "Your husband isn't just careless. He's arrogant. He left a trail so wide a blind man could follow. That's good for us." For the next several weeks, Maria became my silent ally. She worked nights combing through accounts, verifying signatures, creating timelines that turned my suspicions into hard fact. Every time she uncovered another forged document, Another suspicious transfer, she sent me a copy with a note in her no-nonsense style, "Add this to your arsenal." Meanwhile, Ben became my anchor. He never pushed, never judged, just listened. When I called in the middle of the night, trembling after another fight with Lucas, he would answer on the first ring. "Breathe," he'd say. "One day at a time. We're building something that lasts longer than fear." Lucas, oblivious, grew bolder. He paraded Madison at social functions, their laughter dripping with intimacy disguised as inside jokes. My parents noticed nothing or chose not to. When I confronted my mother about Madison's frequent visits, she frowned. "She's just helping him with work, Natalie. You've always been too suspicious." The gaslighting deepened. Lucas began moving things in the house. My keys, important mail, even my notebook, and then accusing me of forgetfulness when I panicked. "You're tired, Nat," he'd say, his voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe you should see someone. I worry about your memory." His words burrowed into me like thorns, making me question my sanity. But every time doubt rose, I opened Maria's files. The numbers never lied. One evening, Angela gathered us in her office, Ben, Maria, and me. She laid out the evidence in neat folders, her expression grave but resolute. "We're close," she said, "but timing matters. We can't just drop this in court without strategy. We'll plant seeds, leak controlled information, make sure Lucas incriminates himself further. The goal isn't just to catch him, it's to bury him legally so deep he can't climb out." Ben leaned forward, his jaw tight. "And to protect Natalie, he'll retaliate." Angela's gaze softened as she looked at me. "You'll need to stay calm no matter what stunt he pulls. He'll try to humiliate you again, gaslight you, maybe worse. But remember, silence can be power. Let him think he's winning while we prepare the strike." Her words sank into me like cold steel. Silence had always felt like weakness, the place where I lost myself. But now, framed this way, it became a weapon patience sharpened into strategy. That night, walking home through the snow with Ben, I asked him quietly, "Do you think I'm strong enough for this?" He stopped, turning to face me under the street lamp. Snow clung to his hair, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Nat, you've been surviving Lucas for years. That takes strength most people can't imagine. Now you're not just surviving, you're fighting back, and you're not alone." For the first time in a long while, I believed him. The storm that had once threatened to bury me was shifting. Now it was gathering behind me, ready to carry me forward. The allies I never expected, my brother, a sharp lawyer, a relentless accountant, were no longer just witnesses. They were my army. And Lucas, for all his arrogance, had no idea what was coming. The closer we moved toward action, the more Lucas seemed to sense something shifting beneath his feet. His charm turned volatile, swinging from syrupy apologies to blistering anger in minutes. One evening, he appeared at my bedside with roses, the petals deep crimson, his smile wide but hollow. "I know I've been distracted," he murmured, placing the flowers in my lap. "But you're still my wife. Don't forget that." His eyes lingered too long, as though daring me to contradict the lie. The next morning, the roses lay wilted in the trash, their perfume cloying in the kitchen. Lucas's gifts were never about love. They were reminders of ownership. Behind the facade, the pressure mounted. Angela advised me to prepare for the smear. Lucas would not go quietly. He would tarnish me, drag my name through mud, twist the narrative until even friends doubted me. The first blow landed at Sunday dinner with my parents. Lucas raised a glass to my mother and said with mock sincerity, "Thank you for being patient with Natalie. Her episodes have been hard on us all." The table fell silent. My mother's fork hovered in the air. Madison cleared her throat, eyes darting between us. My father chuckled awkwardly. "Well, stress can do strange things." No one looked at me. I clenched my fists under the table nails, biting into my palms. Lucas had planted the seed of doubt right in front of them, and they let it take root. After dinner, I stood in the driveway, the night air slicing cold across my face. Ben joined me, his jaw set. "They'll see the truth soon enough," he said. "Let him play his games. The numbers don't lie." Still, the smear campaign escalated. Lucas whispered to colleagues that I had a drinking problem. He hinted at affairs I'd never had. Madison, ever eager, posted photos of her and Lucas at work events, captions dripping with innuendo. My phone buzzed with pitying texts from acquaintances. Each lie was a stone, and he piled them on my back, hoping I'd crumble. But Maria was tireless. She traced offshore transfers back to a Cayman account under Madison's name. She produced side-by-side comparisons of my genuine signature and Lucas's forged scrawls. "The jury won't need a magnifying glass," she said dryly, pushing the documents across Angela's desk. "It's blatant." Angela outlined the plan we would present, not just the financial fraud, but the pattern of psychological abuse, gaslighting, public humiliation, coercion. "Judges don't just look at numbers," she explained. "They look at behavior. We'll show him for what he is, a manipulator and a criminal." As trial approached, the tension at home became unbearable. Lucas's voice grew louder, his accusations sharper. One night during a blizzard, he yanked my coat from the closet and sneered, "Out. You want to be dramatic? Let's see how you like the cold." He pushed me toward the door, the snow howling outside like a living thing. My phone buzzed in my hand. I tried to call Ben, but the battery blinked red and died mid-ring. I pounded the frozen air with my fists, panic clawing at me. Then, through the swirl of white headlights cut across the driveway, Ben's truck skidded to a stop. He leapt out, wrapping his coat around my shoulders, fury blazing in his eyes. Lucas stood frozen on the porch, shock flickering across his face. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Ben's voice was calm, steady, lethal. "Protecting my sister. Something you forgot how to do." The snow stung my skin, but warmth spread through my chest. Lucas thought he had left me to freeze, but he had only strengthened my resolve. His storm was almost over. Mine was just beginning. The trial loomed ahead, and for the first time I felt ready. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and burnt coffee, the kind of place where truth was supposed to matter more than appearances. I walked through the double doors with Ben on one side and Angela on the other, my heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that steadied me. Lucas was already inside, flanked by his attorney, his posture radiating confidence as though the entire proceeding were a mere inconvenience. Madison sat behind him, arms crossed, her glittering earrings catching the fluorescent lights. When our eyes met, she smirked a smug, cruel smile that twisted something deep inside me. The judge entered robes, billowing slightly as the bailiff called for order. "This court is now in session." My pulse raced, each beat loud in my ears. Angela had told me to expect theatrics to remain calm, no matter what Lucas's side threw at us. I gripped the edge of the table, whispering Ben's mantra in my mind. "Evidence never blinks." Lucas's lawyer began with a polished speech painting him as a devoted husband, unfairly maligned by a bitter wife. "My client," he declared, "is the victim of exaggerations and fabrications. Mrs. Cross has suffered from emotional instability, and her accusations are not only baseless, they're vindictive." He gestured toward me, his tone dripping with mock concern. "This is a woman scorned, not a credible witness." The words stung, but Angela squeezed my arm gently before rising. She wasted no time with flourishes. "Your Honor, the defense's strategy is clear: discredit the victim. But what cannot be discredited are numbers, signatures, and transfers. We intend to prove Mr. Cross not only betrayed his marriage, but violated state and federal law." She turned sharply toward Lucas. "And we will show that arrogance blinded him to the trail he left behind." Maria was the first to testify. Calm, methodical, she explained each suspicious transfer, each forged authorization. Large monitors displayed side-by-side signatures, mine steady and clear, and Lucas's forgeries rushed and inconsistent. Even without forensic training, Maria said, pointing to the enlarged images, the discrepancies are obvious. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Next came the audio recordings, voicemails where Lucas's voice dripped with condescension, telling me I was forgetful, unstable. One particularly chilling clip echoed through the room. "No one believes you, Natalie. You don't even believe yourself." The words hung heavy in the air. For once, the silence in the room was not mine, it was his. When it was my turn to testify, my knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself to the stand. I described the gala, the humiliation, the late-night fights, the snowstorm where Lucas shoved me into the blizzard. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth, each word steady, each detail crisp. "He wanted me to disappear," I said softly. "But evidence never blinks, and neither do I anymore." Lucas's lawyer tried to rattle me. "Mrs. Cross, isn't it true you've exaggerated events before? that your own family has questioned your memory." I met his gaze evenly. My family questioned me because Lucas fed them lies. But my brother found me that night in the snow. In these files, I gestured toward the evidence Maria had compiled. Don't lie. Lucas did. Ben's testimony sealed the cracks. He described the missed call the night he found me shivering outside Lucas, standing smugly on the porch. That wasn't the action of a husband. That was the action of a man who thought he was untouchable. By the time Angela delivered closing arguments, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. "This case is not just about financial fraud," she told the judge, her voice firm, resonant. "It is about a pattern of control manipulation and cruelty." Mr. Cross believed his charm could shield him, his wife's silence could protect him. But silence has a way of turning into testimony, and today that testimony is backed by irrefutable proof. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. His gaze swept over Lucas, then me. "I've reviewed the evidence carefully. The financial trail is clear. The pattern of psychological abuse is disturbing. Mr. Cross' arrogance is not a defense. You are guilty of fraud, forgery, and coercive control. Sentencing will be 8 years in state prison plus restitution of misappropriated funds." He struck the gavel. The sound was final absolute. Gasps filled the room. Madison leapt to her feet, shouting, "This isn't fair!" The bailiff warned her to sit down. Lucas's face drained of color, his confident mask crumbling as reality crashed down. As he was led away in cuffs, he twisted back toward me. "You'll regret this, Natalie." But I didn't flinch. I sat tall, my hands folded calmly in my lap. For years, his voice had controlled the narrative. Now it was nothing more than noise fading into the distance. I glanced at Ben, who gave me a small nod, pride gleaming in his eyes. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Lucas thought the snowstorm would break me. He never expected that it would be the trial that broke him. The verdict cracked through my life like a thunderclap, but the aftershocks were slower, quieter, more insidious. When Lucas was taken into custody, my parents didn't rush to my side the way I naively hoped they would. Instead, they retreated into silence, avoiding my calls, responding with clipped texts that said only, "We need time." It was as though the truth had embarrassed them more than Lucas's lies ever had. Madison, of course, went on the offensive. She flooded social media with posts claiming I had framed Lucas, painting herself as his loyal confidant. In one photo, she stood outside the courthouse in a tailored coat, chin lifted, captioned, "Justice isn't always served. Sometimes it's stolen." The comments were brutal. Friends and acquaintances I once trusted called me bitter, jealous, unstable. Angela warned me this would happen. People who can't face the ugliness of truth often attack the person who reveals it. She said, her tone steady but not unkind. "Don't answer them. Let silence be your ally." It wasn't easy. Each cruel comment cut deep, reopening wounds that hadn't yet healed. But I clung to the facts. Lucas was behind bars. His fraud exposed, his empire of manipulation dismantled. For once, the numbers were louder than the lies. Still, practical matters demanded attention. The restitution order meant Lucas's assets would be liquidated, but untangling our finances was a labyrinth. Maria sat with me for hours, guiding me through account closures, property divisions, reclaiming what was rightfully mine. She was meticulous, but also patient. "You're not just rebuilding your finances," she reminded me. "You're reclaiming your freedom." Ben became my shield in the public sphere. At family gatherings, when whispers turned sharp and accusatory, he stepped in with quiet authority. "Natalie doesn't need to defend herself. The court already did that." His unwavering support kept me standing when the ground still felt uncertain. One particularly bitter night, I received a letter from my father. His handwriting, once familiar and comforting, felt foreign on the page. "We can't understand why you exposed your marriage this way. Family matters should stay private. Lucas may have made mistakes, but prison is harsh. You could have handled this differently." I read the words again and again, the chill sinking deeper than any snowstorm. He still saw Lucas as a man who simply made mistakes while I was the daughter who broke the family's image. I cried, then angry, aching tears that blurred the ink. But when the sobs subsided, I realized something important. Their silence, their disappointment, no longer defined me. For years, I had lived craving their approval, bending myself to fit their expectations. But justice didn't need their applause. It stood on its own. News of Lucas's conviction rippled outward. The bank distanced itself, issuing a terse press release about unethical behavior by a former executive. Some colleagues privately emailed me congratulations, though few dared to say anything publicly. Madison disappeared from my parents' home for a while, her loyalty to Lucas making her unwelcome even in their eyes. Life didn't transform overnight. Bills still needed paying, my house still echoed with loneliness, and the scars of betrayal still throbbed in the quiet hours. But each day felt a fraction lighter. Each step I took without Lucas's shadow trailing me felt like a victory. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the snow melt into rivulets along the street, Ben joined me with 2 mugs of coffee. We sat in silence for a while, the steam curling into the cold air. Finally, he said, "You did more than survive him, Nat. You beat him. Not just in court, in life. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I sipped the coffee, its warmth seeping into me. The smear campaigns, the family, silenced the online venom. They still hurt, but they no longer ruled me. Lucas's storm was over, and though the aftermath was messy, I was still standing, and I intended to keep walking forward. The weeks after the sentencing were a blur of paperwork meetings and quiet mornings where I had to remind myself that the silence in my house was no longer dangerous. No footsteps pounding up the stairs, no sneering voice questioning my memory, no slammed doors. Just silence, real silence. For the first time in years, it felt like peace. Angela stayed in close contact, guiding me through the final legal details. Divorce proceedings were swift, given the criminal conviction. Lucas tried to stall from his cell, sending letters scrawled with venomous pleas. "You'll regret this, Natalie, and no one will ever love you like I did." I shredded them without hesitation. Angela chuckled when I told her, "That's not love. That's control clawing at its last breath." Maria wrapped up her role with precision, handing me a thick binder of documents, my new beginning, she called it. Each page was a record of reclaimed funds, accounts secured in my name-alone property titles, scrubbed clean of Lucas's influence. "You've got more stability than most people dream of," she said. "Don't waste it on looking back." But rebuilding wasn't just about finances. It was about finding myself again. I began small morning walks in the park with a thermos of coffee, volunteering at the local library on Saturdays, reconnecting with friends I had once pushed away under Lucas's shadow. Some friendships were gone for good, poisoned by his lies, or simply eroded by distance. But the ones that remained felt stronger, forged in honesty. Ben became more than just my protector. He became my confidant. Over late-night dinners at his apartment, we laughed about childhood memories, something we hadn't done in years. He encouraged me to see a therapist, reminding me that healing wasn't weakness. "You patched yourself up on survival for too long," he said. "Now it's time to actually heal." Therapy was hard. Sitting in that office, naming the gaslighting, the manipulation, the betrayal, it hurt more than I expected. But it also freed me. Each session was like prying open a window in a house that had been locked shut, letting fresh air sweep away the rot. Slowly, I reclaimed my voice. I joined a small women's support group Angela recommended. Sitting in a circle of strangers, I listened to stories eerily similar to mine, different names, different circumstances, but the same thread of control and silence. When it was my turn, my voice trembled at first. "My husband left me in the snow," I said simply. Gasps filled the room, and then I kept talking. By the end, tears blurred my vision, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Madison remained a ghost in my life, her betrayal still raw. My parents stayed distant, unable to reconcile their image of family with the truth I had forced into the light. It hurt, but I accepted it. Not everyone could follow me into this new chapter. Not everyone deserved to. On a crisp spring morning, I walked past the courthouse where Lucas's fate had been sealed. The cherry blossoms were blooming delicate pink petals drifting onto the steps where I had once stood trembling. I paused, letting the breeze lift my hair, and realized I no longer associated the building with fear. To me, it had become a place of reckoning, of truth, finally finding its voice. Life was not perfect. The scars would always be there, faint but undeniable. But as I looked up at the sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the fragile kind that could be crushed by a cruel word or a forged document, but the steady, enduring kind that came from surviving the storm and stepping into the sun. The fragments of my life were scattered, but they were mine again. And piece by piece, I was learning how to build something stronger. Spring unfolded slowly that year, as though the world itself was cautious about granting me too much too soon. The snow finally melted, leaving behind patches of earth damp and raw, much like I felt scarred but alive, waiting for growth. I decided not to sell the house despite the memories etched into its walls. Instead, I stripped it bare. Lucas's leather armchair was hauled to the curb. Madison's forgotten scarf was burned in the fireplace. I painted the living room a warm, soft yellow, a color Lucas would have mocked as cheap and cheerful. To me, it felt like sunlight captured on plaster. Ben stopped by, often his laughter filling the rooms in a way that reminded me I wasn't alone. "Feels like a different house," he said one evening, carrying in a box of kitchenware I'd bought on my own. I smiled. That's because it finally belongs to me. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights I still woke sweating hearing Lucas's voice in my dreams. Other times I caught myself flinching when a man raised his voice in a grocery store. But therapy helped. The support group helped. Even volunteering at the library reading to children with their wide, trusting eyes reminded me that innocence and hope still existed in the world. One day, Angela called. "There's a community center downtown," she said. "They're looking for volunteers to run workshops for women leaving difficult marriages. I thought of you." At first, I hesitated. Me standing in front of strangers telling them how to rebuild. But then I remembered the circle of women who had listened when I spoke about the snowstorm, their eyes wide, their nods of understanding. Maybe my story could be more than scars. It could be a lantern in someone else's dark. I agreed. And on a rainy Thursday evening, I found myself standing in a modest classroom, a whiteboard behind me, a handful of women seated in plastic chairs. My voice shook at first. "I'm Natalie Cross," I began, "and I know what it feels like to think silence is the only way to survive. But I also know that evidence never blinks, and neither does truth." As I spoke, I saw hope flicker in their eyes, the same hope I had clung to. By the end of the session, women stayed behind to thank me, some in tears, some with shaky smiles. One whispered, "You made me believe I can leave." That night, I cried too, but not from despair, from purpose. Lucas's storm no longer defined me. His sentence, his downfall, were just chapters in a book I refused to keep rereading. My story had turned toward something larger, something stronger. Months later, I walked through the city on a cool summer evening, the street lamps glowing amber against the twilight. A young woman from the support group spotted me and waved, her face brighter than I had ever seen it. She had filed for divorce the week before. That small gesture, that glimmer of courage, felt like the truest victory. Back home, I sat on the porch with Ben, sipping iced tea as fireflies winked across the yard. "You know," he said quietly, "you didn't just survive him. You changed because of him. You're building something bigger than he ever imagined." I looked out at the night, the air soft with promise. For so long, I had been defined by silence, by betrayal, by snow that bit into my skin. Now I was defined by choice, by resilience, by the decision to speak, to fight, to rebuild. The storm had passed. The fragments were whole again. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I was ready to meet it head on with truth as my weapon, hope as my compass, and freedom as my home.